I'm here with Jeff Echols. Jeff Echols is on a mission to change the way architects do business by helping them communicate empathy, not ego, so clients see value, not commodity. He's the president and chief strategy officer at echoEngagement, the host of the Build Your Brand podcast, and a sought-after speaker covering the topics of branding, commoditization, disruption, empathy, and relevance. His brand new hot off the presses keynote is entitled Ego versus Empathy, How the Stories You Tell Are Making You a Commodity. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks, Michelle. Great to be here.
I hope everything's fine with you and you're staying healthy and as happy as you can be in your house with your wife and children all working.
Well, other than being pretty tired of this chair that I'm sitting in, in this room that I'm in all day, every day, we're just fine. We're blessed to be healthy, and I think it's a good time for all of us to kind of take a step back and look at our priorities and look at what's really important in our lives. And we're learning that staying at home is not terrible. So, so we're just fine.
Yeah. So what are your first recollections of experiencing architecture?
That's an interesting question. I'm originally from Atlanta. My family is all from the South, although we're literally spread across the world now. But as a kid, I would go to my grandparents' house, the farm where my dad grew up, and I was always fascinated by. At one point, it was a working dairy farm, and I was always fascinated by the giant barn, and the little dairy buildings, and so that agrarian architecture. But then when I was, I guess I was about 8 years old, my dad was transferred from Atlanta to Chicago. And my mom is moving to a foreign land, basically. Dad's going off to work, and mom's there with us three kids. I'm the oldest of three.
Okay.
And she's always been an explorer, and she's a lifelong learner. And so one of the things that she did was she dragged us around to every Frank Lloyd Wright property, every Frank Lloyd Wright project in the Chicago area. So I, from the time of about being 8 until, when I left Chicago, I was obviously surrounded by Frank Lloyd Wright projects and other projects I learned later, but I have literally done the walking tour, done every the open houses, the tours of the houses, the Roby House. I used to walk by Unity Temple every single day, twice a day, actually. And so that was one of the biggest influences, was being surrounded by this guy's work and understanding that he designed everything in the home, if it was a home. And, this idea of connecting architecture and place, and of course, prairie and all of those things. And that was the thing that really sparked in me this idea that, design can touch everything, and design is not necessarily just about the object, but the interaction of the object and the place and the people and all those things. And I've always been fascinated by those ideas. So that's really what kind of took that original agrarian piece and turned it into something more formal, maybe.
Yeah.
And kind of, that's why I went to architecture school, to be, real blunt about it.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've always been fascinated by farm buildings. And they're everywhere. It's like even up and down the coast, the coast of California or up the 5, you're surrounded by, you're going through the area where all the cows are. We still have areas on the
still have cows. Yeah.
We still have cows. And And, but I've never been to Chicago, and people are always surprised. I've only been, I was only through the United Terminal. That's the only time I've ever even been close to Chicago. And I always, I wanted to make it this year. Let's see if I'll be able to make it this year. But I have been in the Midwest and been, to uh, other Frank Lloyd Wright buildings in the Midwest, like the Price Tower and the one.
Right.
My husband grew up in Mason City, Iowa, and his
Oh, right.
parents, his grandparents actually had a Walter Burley Griffin and Marion Mahoney home there on the Glen. So we've seen the one that they moved across the street
Right.
from the Glen, that Frank Lloyd Wright house, and we've seen the bank building there in downtown Mason City.
Right.
Which is now, I guess it's a hotel now. They made it into hotel.
I don't know.
Maybe
I didn't know that.
They made it back into a hotel or something. Yeah. So I'll make it to Chicago one of these days.
Let me know. I'll be your tour guide.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay. So what are 3 classic buildings that you like and why? I always say 3 because I don't, it's hard for architects to just think of one building or.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I might start with Unity Temple because I spent so many years walking past that building a couple times a day. It's not necessarily the most iconic Frank Lloyd Wright project, but it's just that familiarity and that connection to it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I don't necessarily want to stay on the Frank Lloyd Wright theme, but the Guggenheim is amazing. Yeah. If we take, maybe we juxtapose the Guggenheim with some of the Gehry projects that are out in your area. Frank Gehry is another architect that's always fascinated me, and I think between the fish and the different concert halls, those would have to be as a group would have to be on my list. And what would be a third? I mean, growing up basically growing up in Chicago, you'd have to go to one of the towers. It'd have to be Sears Tower. I don't care what people think the name of it is now. It's the Sears Tower. Yeah. Or the John Hancock. I mean, those are easy examples, just again based on familiarity and proximity.
And you know what? That's good because nobody has mentioned any towers as one of their classic buildings before. Amazing. I mean, it's amazing. Like the Salk Institute, gets mentioned. I think like 50% of the time it's the Salk Institute. It was funny because Angie and Larry, when I interviewed them both separately, they both mentioned this one house that's by Paul Rudolph. And then, I told him in his interview, I said, yeah, the only reason why I know that house is because your wife mentioned it. And
that's funny.
Yeah. Besides that, he's like, oh, let's see if we get any of the other ones. But they didn't match up with the other two. But
yeah. Well, living for 20 years or so in Chicago and the Chicago area is the birthplace of the skyscraper. We've got to go. Got to go to the towers.
Yeah. And the Guggenheim, I hadn't been back to New York for 40 years before I went for the conference.
Yeah.
And so that was the first time that I'd ever seen the Guggenheim. And I was like really, I was surprised. I saw Marilyn Moninger there also, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so impressed with this building. All I've ever heard the entire time was like how awful this building was. They typically say, oh, it's like, oh, it's not, it's about the building, it's not about the art. And I just thought it was great. And I had seen the little the on Maiden Lane in San Francisco. There's
Mm.
they kind of call it like the first Guggenheim, because they have the spiral ramp that goes
Okay.
up and it's Maiden Lane. But of course, the exterior doesn't have any, besides like a little opening that they have on the front. There's no no clue that inside there is a spiral ramp, not like the Guggenheim where it's expressed on the exterior.
Right.
But yeah, those were, and the Gehry buildings. I mean, I think people, if they've never seen a Gehry building, they just have no they have no appreciation for it. I mean, I think a lot of architects, they just like to say like, oh, I hate his work, or I hate his but I always see also that, architecture, it's not it's not just about how the building ends up, but the process in order to get. And when you see that he's been able to do something, plus he didn't do, he started with the parking garages. I think he was 55 when he did the parking garages.
That's kind of amazing.
I know, it is amazing, because, and then that's like when he said, you know what, I'm tired of doing this work that I've been doing, and I'm going to start doing the projects that I really want to do. And I believe that he was 55 because I think he's 80 now. So
That's about right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, being 55, I feel a lot, I'm like, oh, they're good. It's like the rest of, like, I have like more time.
There's hope.
There's hope.
Yeah. Well, I think, I totally get the reaction where someone's architect or not says, oh, I can't stand Gary's stuff. I totally understand that. And it doesn't surprise me that people would name Salk or some of those. I mean, the power of some of those spaces and the beauty of symmetry and views and all of and proportion and all of those things, totally get that. But one of the things that's always amazed me about whether it's Gary or any of the deconstructivists or whatever is, I mean, you can look at those projects in a magazine or wherever, online or something, and go, oh my gosh, I mean, what a hot mess, right? But then to go and experience them and judge it on the same level as the Salk and go, and of course with Gary, it's going to be free flowing and it's going to be curving and it's going to be topsy turvy and all those things. But go to this spot and feel the power of this space. Yeah. And feel the way that he's manipulated the fabric of the exterior or whatever. And it's with his work or Zaha or any of them, you go, I mean, some people will say, is this architecture? Or is it art? Or is it, is it structural calisthenics, or what is it?
Yeah.
But I think you're exactly right. There's more to it. When I was a student, Ohio State opened the Wexner Center. I didn't go to Ohio State, but I went to Ball State, which is about 2 hours, and they opened the Wexner Center, Peter Eisman, and I was there for a student competition related to the opening of this, and Peter Eisman spoke, and I just remember him talking about the way that they designed it. And if you're not familiar with it, I mean, it's sort of a fractured thing, and it's very Peter Eisman. They shift the grids and all these things, and there's a part of me, very honestly, that I said when he's talking about, the grid follows the flight pattern of the airplanes and this, and there's a part of me as I was standing there and I'm going, that's a bunch of BS, right? But
That was your rationalization for an
Exactly.
intuitive move.
Exactly.
Yes.
That's exactly right. But at the same time, there were some pretty amazing spaces that were created by all those shifts and,
Mm-hmm.
the rotating these grids and, whatever. And to their credit, very similar to Wright, they were able to accomplish carrying the details and the level of the detail. And, this grid is shifted and then it extends out into the landscape and the way that these grasses are planted and all that. And,
Mm-hmm.
and that's part of the power, right?
Yeah.
It's the ability to affect not only the building, not only this hinge and the orientation of the staircase and this opening, this fenestration or whatever, but it's going out beyond, it's extending beyond the project into nature or into the city or whatever the setting is. And
Yeah.
I think that's the power.
And I think it's interesting because I'm writing this, I'm writing this blog, and I basically wrote the blog and then wanted to do, because it's kind of, it's the working from home, but then it's also about how we've, as far as like on the West Coast, like this breaking up of architecture, and the fact that like a lot of people, when I was in LA, a lot of people were working out of their homes there. It's like people were still working out of their homes, and it was kind of like, okay, you just go to the person's home. And, when I gave birth to my daughter, I went and, there was an architect that I'd worked for at another office, and he had started his own office. And he didn't really have a lot of space for anybody to work there. And I had a newborn, so it's like I would just go over to, he was only a few blocks away, so I would just take the stroller over with my daughter and, meet with them, and then work, then take the stuff back to my house and like just work on it there in the house. And, people have said like so much like, oh, I can't do it, but it's like, it's the breaking down of like traditional systems that have been in place, and like finding new ways in order to do that. So it's like the working from home, like, oh, we can't work from home, we can't work virtually, like I can't work with that. We have to all be together to work on this project. And then people that do want to telecommute, we're finding it difficult. And now we're like looking and saying, oh, we can telecommute. We can have different, people in different spots. It's like we need to move. We need to change things in order to move forward with the way that it might have to be for, several more months, or at more sporadic times in the next year or 2 years, or however we're going to, because, this probably isn't going to be the first time that we're going to have to do this, or, so kind of, more indoor, outdoor spaces where people want to be able to, to be able to be at their house, but work with several different people in their house, and how is maybe people's homes are going to change because of this new activity that goes on in the house, right? So,
Yeah. I think there's going to be a lot of lasting impact. I mean, it'll definitely change the way we think about how we live and work. And we've talked about this before. Our situation, you mentioned it a minute ago, is our situation is now we have this about, if we include all the floors, 1,700 square foot little historic home right outside of downtown Indianapolis, and now suddenly we have 2 adults and 2 teenage kids and 3 dogs in the house 24 hours a day. And so we think differently about the way we use spaces and so on. And I think people will continue to think about that, and also the health, whether it's, how do we enter the home? What are we bringing into the home? I think they'll think about it in that way, as well as the actual, what we used to call, when we were talking about sustainability, the health in terms of light and air and, materials and things like that. But I also think it's interesting, to your point of the way that people are working in firms now, it's always seemed very ironic to me that we have a profession, and I don't practice architecture anymore. So to be clear, I'm sort of on the outside looking in, in a way, but
Well, and business development is very much.
It totally
I
is.
mean, that is right.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. I'm completely
or it
involved in
should
the,
be. It should be.
it should be, yes.
Yeah.
I'm completely involved in the practice of architecture, but I don't work for a firm, and I haven't drawn a line in a long time. Let's say it that way. Um, but it's always seemed very ironic to me that you have a profession that's so focused on the future and so focused on designing the future and so
Mhm.
focused on keeping up with trends, and we have styles that change to match the time, and all of these things, and yet we we many people will try to fight tooth and nail to keep a very traditional model of
Mhm.
practice. Oh, we couldn't possibly work remotely because there's so much collaboration, that has
Mhm.
to happen. There's these very traditional ideas that are held on to, and that seems to be the piece of the practice, or one of the pieces of the practice, that some people have really not been interested in changing, or making sure that it keeps up with the time, and
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
context, and
Yeah.
that's going to change. Right, it has
Well,
suddenly
yeah, yeah.
changed.
I mean, especially, I mean, and I mean, when you think about control, right? It's really about control, and right now it's out of control. So you're gonna have to be able to navigate these other ways in order to work, and you're not going to be able to be in control. One of the big things about with Jennifer Kretschmer's thing, when I've gone to her seminars and she's talked about working the virtual office, most of the comments from the people in the audience are like, well, how do you know that people are going to be working when, how do you know that people are going to get their work done? And it's like, okay, that's even in your own office. I mean, that's in your office
Yeah,
if somebody's 10 feet away. If they're not getting their work done, there's some other problem. My thing is, if they're showing up, but if they're getting their work done from 8 to 2, right? I'm talking about 8 o'clock at night to 2 in the morning, right? Or they're getting it done from 9 to 5 or 9 to 4. It's the same no matter what. I mean, right? If they're sending stuff to China to get done overnight, right? These big practices, right? They're sending stuff out and getting it done overnight and picking it up in the morning, right? It's being sent digitally back to them. Then why can't they use people that are in the same area virtually?
yeah, yeah. I mean, the fact of the matter is, and there's certainly extenuating circumstances right now, right?
Oh
E-
yeah,
e-
absolutely. And
Everybody's
nobody
been
wants to be in their house 24 hours.
right, right, yeah, and everybody's sort of been thrust into this, and
Hmm.
so many people were not prepared. Maybe most people were
Yes.
not prepared. So there's going to be distractions, and
Hmm.
I've been saying this quite a bit the last few days. Is you understand that when we're talking about business development,
Hmm.
right? There are
Yeah.
people that are taking phone calls with clients and prospective clients, and that may not typically do that. That may not be their usual role, but now that they are,
Hmm.
and they're not sitting in their Aeron chair in their cubicle in the office anymore. They're sitting on their couch, surrounded by their children and their pets.
Hmm.
And so that, that's not necessarily an ideal situation. So we've got to figure out how to deal with that. We've got to figure out how to train people, for these situations. But the
Yeah.
general rule of thumb is, if they were someone that struggled with productivity in the office, they're going to struggle with productivity at home.
Yeah.
Now, for some, they'll actually be more productive at home. It's a more comfortable environment. They have more flexibility in terms of hours and things, like you were just saying.
Yeah.
But if
But,
they were a good employee, put that in quotes, if they were a
hmm.
productive employee in the office, they're generally going to be a productive employee when they're not in the office. And so,
Yeah.
some of this is going to be proven out in the weeks and in coming months. And what I've advised people to do is, you look at the productivity level of people right now in this new situation,
Mhm.
and see how it differs from when they were in the office, and see if it continues in this way, because we're going to transition through this crisis in different ways. There's phases that we'll go through as we transition through the crisis. But to your point, yeah, I mean, there's no reason that some employee, junior or not, couldn't work from home in a different time slot than 9 to 5 or whatever. As long as everyone's able to communicate. And that's the key. And and to be brutally honest with you, if you don't trust your employees when they're working from home, you didn't really trust them when they were in the office. That's the brutal, honest truth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are people that said, "Oh, well, if I'm not gonna, if they're not gonna do their work in the, for the office," and I said, "Well, were you in the office the entire time that you were,
right,
in an office? I mean, are you in your office the whole day? I mean, when you leave to go away for 3 hours, does nobody do any work? Because they're not going to do any work in life. That's not any different than what they would do." So. Yeah. And maybe that's your problem. Maybe there's something.
You said it, not me.
I don't want to do it. I don't know. Who knows? Okay. So, what do you like about being an architect?
Well, so first of all,
an emerging architect. Is
that the new term?
Is that the term? I think that's the term now. I think it's emerging.
I don't know. So to be clear, I am not a registered architect. I have a couple of degrees and I worked in firms for 23, 25 years, something like that. But I never sat for a single, this is back when we actually did the exam on paper, right? I never sat for a single section of the exam. And the reason the main reason was that I tell people that my career was hijacked by others. I benefit from the fact that others saw skills and proficiencies in me that I didn't recognize or didn't accept or whatever. The first firm that I was working for in Chicago, I was the right out of school and CAD jockey basically. And someone came up and tapped me on the shoulder and they said, "Hey, you're really good at those graphics. Why don't you go help the marketing department? They need your help on this thing they're trying to finish up." And then, later it's like, "Hey, you're really good at writing. Go help the business development team with what they're putting together. They've got to have it done by Friday. They need your help." And so, it was stuff like that. People kind of seeing those things and pulling me in different directions. And what they really did was they opened my eyes. They opened the door for me to see that architecture is a project. It's a thing, and architecture is a process. We design things and we go through this construction and construction administration, all those things. And architecture is a profession and it's a practice. And there's this business of architecture. And so they really opened me up to that world of the business of architecture. And that's just kind of, even though I managed projects and I designed and all of those things for a lot of years, most of the time I always wore another hat. And eventually I started playing roles like director of marketing, director of business development in some smaller firms, some startup situations, heading up entire divisions and, being in charge of different aspects of the firm. And so then out on my own now, I work with firms on marketing, business development, management consulting, leadership development issues, but communications issues. But so I still love design. I mean, that's still in my heart. It's a passion. But where I apply that now is in how we tell stories and in
Mhm.
how we talk about architecture and how we sell the value proposition of architecture, if you will,
Mhm.
but really in driving towards what's relevant about what you do, Ms. Architect or Mr. Architect. Um, if you do residential design or hospitality design or higher ed or whatever you do, what is relevant about what you do in the eyes of your client? Because that's really all that matters. I
Mhm.
know there are a lot of architects that'll hear that'll really not like to hear that, that'll push back against that. But if you truly want to be the trusted advisor that almost every architect talks about being, if you truly want to be the professional, then you've got to figure out what's more relevant about what you do than your competitors in the
Mhm.
eyes of your client.
Yeah, and I think that I mean, I looked at in Cran. We had someone spoke. You spoke the year before in Cincinnati, and then
Yeah.
somebody spoke this last time, and it was kind of like, okay, doing kind of your business development plan and like assessing your own firm. But one of the things that's difficult, if you're a sole proprietor, you don't really know. I mean, you right, you need another person to kind of tell you, this is what I think that you're good at. Because typically what somebody thinks they're good at might not be the thing that they're good at, right? You need like that other person to like look and say, no, this is what you should be selling about yourself.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So it's we're a sole proprietor, right? We're trying to do everything ourselves. And so we're trying to do business development, but and bigger firms, they should have a business development department that and it should they should just, I don't know how they end up doing, I mean, I talked to some places and they're still doing their billing. They're like a firm of 10 and they're still doing their own billing, and I'm like, why are you do you enjoy doing the billing? I mean, why are you doing that? Or why are you I mean, and I'm writing proposals for people, but it's certainly not something that I enjoy. I mean, it's just, I would rather be doing something else, meeting with the clients, designing, bring that. But as far as the other thing, it's um
There are a lot of people that wear a lot of hats, especially in smaller practices, whether you're a sole proprietor or 10 people or smaller or whatever, that they need, and this is not judgmental. I mean, I suffer from the same thing. I think we all do to some extent, but you're wearing 17 hats, right? And you need to get real familiar with Pareto's principle, the 80-20 rule.
mhm,
What should I really be doing? What are the 20% that I'm really good at that I need to spend 80% of my time on? And what's the
mhm,
80% of the stuff that I'm just either not that good at it or not interested in it or whatever the case is,
mhm,
that I should just figure out a way to have someone else do it.
mhm.
And what's interesting about that is that it's usually so much more cost effective to
Oh,
hire someone to
yeah,
do that.
yeah.
Um, and it's funny. I have benefited from other people looking, like I said, other people looking at me and going, "This is what you're really good at. You should really do more of this." And I've definitely benefited from that.
Mhm,
And you look at assessments, whether it's Myers Briggs or the Strengths Finders or any of those. That's become an entire industry now, right? And it's
yeah.
it's all basically the kind of thing that many of us that had mentors and others that were able to point things out, like in my case,
Mhm,
that's basically what people are doing. If we can get really dialed in to what we're good at and focus on those things, we can make so much more impact. And I was having a conversation yesterday
mhm,
with a group that I'm working with, and we talk, from a marketing standpoint
Yeah.
and a message branding and messaging standpoint. And we talked about the fact that if you were able to and willing to bring your clients into this process, the people that you've designed things for and that have, let's face it, when you design a project for a client, you have just committed to a relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're in this slog, and sometimes it's fun and sometimes it's not, and sometimes it's really stressful and sometimes it's euphoric. It's this whole process that you go through, this whole journey you go on. If you can get those people involved in developing your branding and your marketing, think about how powerful that is. Because
Yeah.
if they're your ideal client, you need more of them. You need more people like them. And so if you can get them involved and they go, well, Michelle, what we really enjoyed about this process and what you were really good at was this. Those are the things you had better be focusing on, because your ideal client is telling you that other people like them will appreciate those things and will value those things. The problem is most of us are terrified to have those kinds of conversations. And it's exactly the kind of conversations you need.
No. Those are the exact. Well, it's funny, because I do custom residential. I typically, it's like I'll meet with a couple, and then like halfway through the process, when you're designing something, they're like, "Boy, I bet you didn't realize that you were also going to be a marriage counselor." And I said, "No, I did realize that I was going to be doing that. That's why I kind of like, why I should be getting paid way more." But anyway, yeah. But it's like you can't say like, "Oh, okay, I'm there for my clients to guide them through the process." I'm not going to claim to be any great marriage counselor for myself. But it's like as far as being there for my clients, yes, I am there for my clients.
Yeah, the cobbler's kids have no shoes.
Yes, the cobbler's kids have no shoes. Exactly. So, what would you like to say about the future of architecture?
Well, I think the timely thing to talk about right now is that obviously we're, what is this, April 16th when we're recording this, and we're by most timelines in the United States, we're about 5 weeks into this COVID-19 crisis. And I want to believe that most people would agree that everything has changed. Everybody's affected in some way by this crisis, whether it's health or job and job loss or whatever. Everybody's affected in some way. And so that also means that everybody is thinking about things differently. Your clients have different needs and different goals today than they did 5 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago or whatever. I mean, just things have changed, right? And so I think one of the great opportunities for architects is that right now, maybe it's time to watch Good Will Hunting, but is that the right movie? No, Dead Poet Society. Sorry.
Oh, Dead Poet Society.
Sorry. Botched that one. But so tonight we're going
to. They have Robin Williams.
Yeah. See, it's I'm gonna watch a Robin Williams comedy special is what I'm gonna do. But it's time to watch Dead Poet Society and think it's time to seize the day.
Yeah.
It's time to say, okay, everything has changed and is changing and will continue to change until we get to some level of normalcy, whatever that means. And we don't even know what that means today, but we have a real opportunity to, especially for anybody that said, hey, as architects, we're not valued the way we should be. Okay, fine. Then take this opportunity to really redefine and rethink the value of an architect and rethink the way that architects can impact X. And I would encourage you to talk to your clients and say, okay, what's changed? How have your needs changed? How have your goals changed? How are you thinking differently today? Because that's what, when we get into this discussion of value, the key point is that, when we say architects aren't valued the way we should be, well, the first thing is we have part of the equation wrong. We don't hold the definition of value. Our clients hold the definition of value. They get to determine what's valuable and what's not. We can propose a fee, but value is not about money. Value is about the result of what you have produced. And so we have a great opportunity right now to redefine and rewrite the story of the value of architecture. And I don't mean that in a superfluous way. I mean that we have a real opportunity right now to say, this is how architects can affect the recovery from this crisis. This is how architects can affect healthcare. And I mean that in a very literal way. This is how architects can affect these things if we seize the day. And we can, and on some level, of course, we have to talk about remote working and things like that. But I think it's much more important right now to not think so much about the mechanics of practice and think a lot more about the impact we can have on life and society and all the things that go with it. Because we are in maybe an unmatched time right now in terms of disruption and the way that the way that we think about things and the way that we do things and the way that society interacts. And we have the opportunity to redefine the way that we impact that if we take action and we move to the forefront and don't do it in the way that we've been trying to do it for 167 years or whatever the time frame is in the United States. Understand your clients, understand the needs of society, develop a radical empathy for the people that you serve, and get after it. Get after understanding how to remain and become more relevant today than we were 6 weeks ago. Because that's, you mentioned my keynote that I give, this ego versus empathy. That's the disconnect. We come into a conversation, and it's understandable in professional services. You are the licensed professional. You are, in fact, the expert. You are the one with all the experience, the uncommon experience that your clients can't possibly have. And so it's understandable when we approach things from a point of what we think is important and what we think really matters. But the problem is the person on the other side of the table, based on neuroscience, is going, hey, what's in it for me? What's important to me? And so when we approach things from a point of empathy, we approach things in an alignment with our clients and in an alignment with these people. And so if we can approach the conversation from a point of empathy, we have a lot better chance of completely changing the tide of the way that people perceive architects and architectural services and architecture in general. And so that's the opportunity that's on the table today. Whether or not we take a hold of that and run with it is a completely different story, but we cannot approach it from the aspect of, we're the experts, we know what to do, follow me. That's been the attempt that everybody's been trying to make, that has led to the discussions of, we're not valued, right? We can't be the heroes of the story if we want it to resonate with the audience. That is a hard set rule based on story structure, which is based on neuroscience. You think of part of my ego versus empathy talk that I do. I use examples of politics, and not to make this political.
Yeah.
But if we look at the 2016 election, the Clinton versus Trump campaigns, think about those, the communications, think about the stories that those two campaigns told. And again, not to get political, but whoever developed the messaging for Hillary Clinton developed a message that said, I'm with her. We just made Hillary Clinton the hero. Whoever developed the messaging for the Trump campaign said, make America great again. They developed this idea of an aspirational story that we might be able to get behind. Oh, yeah, that's something that I believe in, right? That's something that's motivating because we're all in this together. And so when we try to be the hero of our own story, number one, you're asking me, do I think you're the hero or not? Neuroscience, my brain says, no way. No way. I'm in it for me deep down because I've got to survive. My brain tells me I've got to survive. You can't be the hero. There can't be two heroes in this story, and my story has to be about me, the hero. So we're in direct conflict with that person's brain. And so when they developed the messaging for Hillary Clinton, setting her up as the hero of the story, they set up a story that's in direct conflict with people's brains. You go back, to the Obama, especially to the original Obama campaign where it was hope.
Yeah. Yes.
That message.
Yes.
That message is, again, not to be political, but that message is almost identical to Make America Great Again in terms of the way that our brains perceive it. And so as architects, when we're thinking about moving forward, we can't, if we want to lead people, which seems counterintuitive, but if we want to lead people, if we want to move people, we cannot set ourselves up as the hero of the story.
Yeah. That's so interesting because it's the I'm with her. It wasn't even right because it's I never really saw it that way. I never really saw it that way. But I mean, I can see, it's like, and I don't know whether it's because because I'm right, like I'm for her. I'm with her. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. And and we view it through our own lens, right?
Probably. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So like me to see like I'm with her, it's like, she's my friend, right? For women that are at the same I think that's the difference, right? For other professional women who are at that same, who think about, like I'm with her, it'd be like, okay, I'm with her, like, we're friends, right? That would be, that's the way that I felt like, which isn't a universal thing, right?
No, it's not universal, and it's hard to make universal messaging, but the problem, but the problem is, even when you view it through that lens and you go, well, that makes me feel like I'm with her, I'm her friend. The problem then is it forces us to ask, do I want her to be my leader because of that context, because of the campaign? But then it also asked us to start analyzing her as a person and everything about her. And so we start to break down that image. Whereas when we, and you can, maybe it's easier to remove maybe it's easier to remove the politics if we compare that campaign to the Hope campaign with Obama, because then you're on the same political party. But when you do that,
I'm with her also gives people the option to say, I don't like her.
Exactly. That's
totally true. Yeah.
Exactly. It basically forces you to make a decision. yes or
Yes.
no, right?
Yeah.
Am I
Yeah.
with her or am I not? And
Yeah.
it puts her at the focus. So if you
Hmm.
take another Democratic campaign and put those two side by side and you say hope, well, yeah, everybody wants hope. Everybody,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
this, again, it's this aspirational image that makes me feel like, well, yeah, I can be a part of that,
Hmm.
because of course we want hope for the future and all those things that came with the rest of that word, or
Oh yeah.
come with
Yeah.
that word.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the same thing that make America great again. It's this aspirational image. And so if we can
Yeah.
do that, if we can create this aspirational image, listen, there is a way that we can design safer environments. There's a way that we
Hmm.
can design environments, in all those conversations that
Yeah.
architects are just
Yeah. Yeah.
primed to have.
Yeah.
Just don't say, listen, architects are going to lead the charge. That's not going to work.
I know. I know. Yeah. Yeah. No, I definitely hear you. Yeah. I mean, that was the whole, like, one of the build your brand, and then, I mean, we can kind of finish up, but the build your brand about, as far as about the about us, right?
Yeah,
About
yeah,
us. I mean,
yeah.
and what for the listeners, what he does is he they're eighth graders, right? Are they eighth graders? Because you're saying that you have to write at an eighth grade level, so they're eighth
Yeah.
graders, and then you ask them to look at people's different bio. And I mean, and you know what's funny is that like, right, I'm doing my website now, and I'm like, okay, and then there's the whole thing about us, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to write about us? Like, about us, it's about me, right? Even though it's about us as the firm, but but how
Yeah.
do I even do that? And that's so difficult, because, right, because I mean, I don't have to put that on the website. It's just that's one of the, that's one of the things that, like,
Something
oh,
people
they want to
expect,
know,
right?
yeah, that people expect. But it's like, yeah, I mean, like, rewriting your website so that it's not about us. It's about
Yeah. Yeah. About us is the biggest misnomer on the internet.
yeah.
Because it's so, again, back to neuroscience,
Mhm.
because our brain, rule number one that our brain has is, I've got to stay alive, which automatically sets every process up. Every process that we go through starts with, is this going to help me survive, or hurt my chances of survival? Is it
Uh-huh.
going to help me thrive, and so on and so forth? So we start out looking through this lens of what's in it for me, basically.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so, the premise of the Build Your Brand podcast is that, number one, we look at a big brand every season. And so season
Mhm.
one, ironically, based on the time that we're in now, season one, the big brand that I analyze is Southwest Airlines.
Mhm.
And so the idea is, we
Which
take
a lot
this,
of us use, which hopefully they're going to start giving us tickets, free
well,
tickets and flights.
yeah, I'm not sure exactly how that's going to go, but that's the big, well-known, well-respected brand that I look at, and I go back to the origin story, and I break it down and deconstruct it, and dissect it, and look for lessons that small firm architects can learn from what they've done.
Mhm. Mhm.
And another piece of that, because I've always been told, and most of us have heard, you need to write at, or communicate at, an eighth grade level. Not to dumb it down, but that's a level that kind of averages out, and
Mhm.
most people are very comfortable at that particular level. And when I was in high school, we had this word processing system that we had to use in English class. And when we'd write a paper, it would analyze the grade level that we wrote at. And so I loved to game that system. I would write, and I'm like, can I get it to 22, or whatever? And the teacher would always hand the paper back and circle that and say, you need to write at an 8th grade level so that everybody can understand it. And, journalism school, I hear this, people can understand it, and it's a better way to communicate. And so what we decided to do with Build Your Brand was I went to an 8th grade, Miss Moyer's 8th grade language arts class, and I spent a couple of hours with them, and we looked at architects' websites and, all this architects' marketing materials and branding. And, I gave him a little.
Who the architects are. He doesn't say who the architects are.
No, I don't. Yes. No one gets thrown under the bus. None of that. But the 8th graders, there's 12 episodes in season 1, and the 8th graders, I think, are in maybe 8 of the episodes. But, I go through, here's an About Us page. We read several of them. They read them for me, and they comment in a very unfiltered, blunt 8th grade way. They would read through and go, well, what does that mean? Or, they've got all kinds of very pure 8th grade reactions to, architects' marketing materials. And I really enjoy that piece of it because it's kind of funny and all of that. But, that's another suggestion, when you're putting your website together, put it in front of a young person and have them tell you what they're reading, tell you what they're hearing, tell you what they think of that. I was working with an engineering firm.
Yeah, and I do that with my kids, right? They're 19, 21, and 25, right? And I'll like ask them about things all the time. I used to ask them about the different hashtag Architox prompts, as far as like, I said, what do you think when you hear this, and they'll say like, So, it's always, or if you need any technology that you just hand it to them, like, here, figure this out.
Right.
That's what
Exactly. Yeah. I was, for a non-architect example, I was working with an engineering firm that one of their, is analyzing their messaging on their website, and one of their big what's the word I want to use? Part of their purpose was to give opportunities and raise awareness in underserved neighborhoods. Okay. So you might have a young woman or a person of color or whatever that may not have known about engineering. And they actually developed a scholarship to Purdue University, a great engineering school right up at Purdue, right up the road from us.
Yeah.
And so this was a big part of them as their culture and everything, and it's on their website, and I, when I finished analyzing their current messaging, I sat down with their CEO and I said, listen, I'm very familiar with what you do. I worked in firms and on these types of projects for over 2 decades. And I'm reading through this page, and even the page where you talk about your scholarship and underserved neighborhoods and all these things that you're so passionate about, and I'm having to read this 2 and 3 times to try to understand it. I'm not a high school kid. I'm not these people that you're trying to connect with and that you're trying to make aware of engineering. I'm pretty well educated in what you do and and how you do it, and I don't understand it.
Yeah.
So how in the world do you think this resonates with one of these people one of these young people that you're trying to connect with and trying to say, hey, there's these opportunities if you're interested in these things, all that. Like, there's no way that you're communicating with the people that you're trying to communicate with.
I know. Yeah. Or, sometimes, right, with like I'll be listening to a podcast, or in the car, I'll turn a podcast on. The kids are like, do we have to listen to this? These are even the ones that I'm on.
Hopefully they don't say that about the Build Your Brand podcast.
Well, the great thing is that they're shorter, right?
Yeah,
So
they're
it's
pretty
like,
short.
yeah. So
Half an hour, 20
yeah.
minutes.
But I mean, no, I'm gonna make them listen to
Yeah.
the Build Your Brand guy because
Yeah.
I think that they all need that.
Yeah. Well, it's Demetrius Lynch, who's he's a little bit north of you.
Yeah.
He's an architect in California. He also is one of the co-hosts of the Spaces podcast. Well,
Okay.
he's our creative director, and so what I really enjoyed about developing season 1 with him was we'd work through all the ideas and the concepts, and
Uh-huh.
I would script everything and record everything, and then of course go and work with the 8th graders and stuff like that. But I'd have all these pieces, and then I'd send it to Demetrius, say, okay, here's all the stuff for episode 1, and here's all this stuff for episode 2, and so on. And then he would send me back, a few days or whatever later. He'd send it back and he'd say, hey, I've got the rough cut for episode 1 done or episode 2 done or something. Give it a listen, see what you think. And I would listen to it, and I'd send him a message back, and I'd say, Demetrius, this isn't at all what I sent you. This is so much better than anything I'd ever imagined.
Right. Well, it really is. I mean, when you have somebody editing the sound, I just thought it's unlike any podcast that I've heard, like any architectural. It really is because you're bringing it, because it's not just us like talking, not that this podcast isn't immensely interesting, but it's just but I just really like how I really like the jet engines, and I thought I really thought that was good. And then the music, which doesn't really seem like music, the typical podcast, right? You've got music at the beginning, and then people are talking, and the music. But I think it's really well done. So.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we did a lot of research. There's a lot. There's a lot about build your brand, and as we go through all 12 episodes, I'm walking you through a structure that's based on a workshop that Mark R. LePage from Entree Architect and I developed. It's the Build Your Brand workshop, and it's this structured thing that walks you through actually building a strong brand. And so the outline of the episodes of the podcast are basically based on that outline. But there's a lot of that is designed to force people to think outside the box, to think outside of their profession. And so when we started to develop the idea of the podcast, we went through the same process. It's what else is out there in architecture related podcasts, certainly, but then what's outside of architecture related podcasts? What are other people doing in other formats? And so, we kind of developed a short list and so on and so forth. Did the same with the Southwest Airlines. Next season it'll be a different brand, but we really wanted to develop something that was different and creative, but that forced people outside of, this is what an architecture related podcast should sound like. Because we're doing that with the whole Build Your Brand podcast. And in looking at Southwest, what in the world does Southwest Airlines have to do with architecture? Well, listen to 12 episodes and you'll find out. But but it's all about forcing people to get into this growth mindset and think outside of the norm, so that they can grow and so that they can build a very strong brand. That's one of the problems that we have in the architecture profession, is that we have a lot of what we do is based, again, back to the idea of the business of architecture. What percentage of firms are led by people that have almost no business training? A lot of them. And then the way that we learn the business of architecture then is built upon a foundation that's not based on the business of anything. And so that's that's one of the points, is that we've got to look outside of the profession to see what
Mhm.
other people are doing. Not to say we're copying it or we're trying to, change certain things, but to look outside and go, there are better ways. There
Yeah.
are more efficient ways. There are things that other people do that there's absolutely no reason that architects can not only embrace, but
Mhm.
say that's the way we need to do things.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of the underlying theme
Yeah,
of
and
what we're
I think
doing
that,
there.
I mean, if you're looking at a design project, like early on in design, a lot of architecture instructors will say, okay, we're going to take an instrument and you're going to draw the instrument. You're going to create like some other type of space by taking out apart like the whole instrument, right? So that's getting people away from thinking
Right.
about preconceived notions of what space are by like taking these parts of an instrument, right, that aren't your typical 90-degree angles on an instrument and take it apart. So it's kind of like you're doing the same thing where you're saying, hey, look at this business, right? Let's not look at an architecture business. Let's look at some other business so that people can't say, well, right? And then again, get involved in that whole thing of saying, oh, I don't like their work, right? Instead of saying, I don't like the business model or whatever.
Right.
Instead, so it's giving you it. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Well, if you want to bring it full circle, you look at Frank Gehry, right?
yeah, yeah.
When he did his own home, right there was a lot of that in there. And it's funny you say, you know, taking apart an instrument or something like that, that
Mhm.
the building that he did in, I just looked it up while you were talking, in Venice, Venice Beach, they're near Los Angeles, for Chiat
Yes,
Day, for
yes.
advertising,
The binocular
the
building.
binoculars.
The binocular building. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Which was
it's
right down the street. Like I would walk by that building all the time because we were in Venice Beach for 10 years. So like
yeah,
I saw when it first went up and everything, and everybody always calls it the binocular building. I mean, even it was Chiat Day's building, but
yeah,
then another building came in after that, right? So it's like it didn't, it wasn't Chiat Day anymore, but yeah, it was the binocular building. Like, oh, the
yep,
binoculars. You'll drive by the binoculars. Da 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 da. So it's like Klaus Oldenburg's binoculars there. You'll go through, and then when you actually would go in, those were round,
right.
meetings, conference rooms with a skylight at the top. But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that was.
Yeah. And so then one of the questions becomes, did he really mean it to be that literal? I don't know the answer to that, but it was obviously, there's a documentary on it somewhere that I saw years ago, and
Uh-huh.
it's, oh, here, let's put these here, and let's put that there. And it's again, it's breaking that thought process and
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
patterns.
Yeah.
And I guess in true Gary style, it just carried all the way through. It's like, okay, now we have the binocular building.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's that.
Yeah. 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 Okay. Well, thank you, God, Jeff. This was great, and I think it was great because so often we don't do any business minded podcasts, even though we totally talked about design a lot. We did talk
Right,
a lot
right.
about design, but this is great, and thank you so much for agreeing to do the interview with me, and I'm gonna work. We're gonna get this thing out in the next 2 days.
Well, thanks for inviting me, and I've had a lot of fun. It's been fun. I know
Yeah.
we've kind of gone all the way around the barn a couple of times, but it was a fun conversation, and I really enjoyed it. And keep doing what you're doing. I mean, there's a ton of value in what you're doing and the way that you do it and who you do it for. So keep doing it.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. Thanks. Okay.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye, Michelle.